Hi, I'm Phil from Arizona Rocky Mineral Company. We're going to do a few short videos. The topic's going to be talking trains. And the first topic we're going to talk about is the beginning. Everybody had a beginning. You know, that line out trade set for Christmas and maybe a bigger railroad later on. Well, it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that a friend of mine invited me over to his house, I guess to play guitar, because we did that. And went upstairs in the bedroom, and there's a train set. And I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Well, it's HO scale. I never heard of it." Anyway, it had hand-laid track, wood ties, ballast, had cardboard buildings, and looked very real. Some scenery on it, so it looked natural. They probably used some natural stamp sand from the mines around there for the basic ground cover. And talking about cardboard buildings, they're still useful today. Anyway, I have one here that I bought many years ago. It was sold by East Sideham Company. Then it was California Models, and now it's Alpine Division. And this is the Sunkist Citrus Exchange. Now the parapets, you know, they look like cardboard because they're so thin, so I made them look a little thicker with plaster, and actually put plaster on the sides for like a stucco to improve it. Then I made a ramada on one end, so it looks a little bit more southwestern. But you can still do a lot with cardboard. So anyway, I really enjoyed that model railroad, and well, I just put it out of my mind. I had life to get started, so about 10 years later, I went up to Michigan to see my father for Christmas, and oh, there's about 10 foot of snow on the ground and blowing, and thought, well, there's not much you can do, so I went to Leo's Drug and bought a model railroad magazine. I knew they had them there, I just never bought one until this time. And I found that very intriguing. So what they were modeling back then is what got me interested, and I still model some of that same stuff because that's what holds my interest, the early stuff. Now they have all kinds of stuff coming out in the magazines, monthly, you know, several magazines. They're just recycling the same old stuff. However, they forget some of the old techniques, which I find very useful. If you go to a magazine rack right now and you go look at Hot Rod magazine, well, they got the same old hot rods on today's magazines as they had back in the 60s, you know. So really, a lot of the old stuff just never goes away. But they stopped publishing some of that stuff, so anyway, I'm here to throw a few things at you that I find useful that you don't see anymore. So when I got back to Minnesota a few months later, I put an ad in the newspaper, wanted to buy a model HO train set. And I put another ad in the paper, air compressor for sale. So this fella calls me up and he says, "Hey, I've got HO stuff and I want to buy that air compressor." So we made a deal. There was a lot of old time stuff. And a couple of the cars that were in that stuff I got from him were these scratch-built stock cars. You know, and I see he got his name on the bottom of one of them. He probably had it in a show. It probably won a prize. It should have. They're very well done. Anyway, these are kind of treasures that came out of that box. And I read them now and then. So anyway, I started putting together what I got from him and on a 4x8 sheet. And thought, this is not going to work. Everything's way too tight. So I brought everything into a spare room in the basement and started building. Anyway, to get started, you know, you don't know anything about the hobby. So Model Railroad had a book called 101 Track Plans, and too many 4x8s, you know, little railroads. I don't remember what was in there. That book's long gone. But later on I got John Armstrong's book on layout design. And there's a lot of good beginner information in here too. Oh, this has been out of print probably 35 years, but you might find one on eBay. But it's just to get you started, give you some ideas. And any layout I ever seen in here would never fit the space I have, but you can steal ideas and concepts and implement it in your own layout. Once you get the track work going, then you need to know how to wire it. So back in the early days, they say, well, you know, pretty soon you're going to want to run 2 trains in a layout. So you buy these switches that are double pull, double throw, with a center off. And you can have cab A up and cab B down. You want the center off because you want to be able to shut the layout down. Now this has been wired for a reversing switch. And a lot of guys would have a forward and reverse switch on the control panel, so you don't wear out the switch on your transformer. And then they also have an east-west switch, which means that when you're going west, the forward is always in that direction and reverse is, you know, right. East-west switch. It gets kind of complicated, but it's useful. Then, in the back of the book, they show using rotary switches. Well, you couldn't find rotary switches years ago. I mean, they're available somewhere, but I never seen them advertised or easy access to them. So I started using rotary switches. And this is a 6-position switch. You have to cut the shaft off because it sticks way too far out. I leave the first position is off, and the other 5 positions allow me to allow 5 different throttles in the same section of track. Now at the most I'm going to only have a few blocks where I'm going to have about 4 throttles that have access to that sections of track. Like for instance, like running trains from the roundhouse down the main line into the yard. Well, we want to be able to use the yard throttle. We want to be able to use a hostler throttle in the yard, or maybe even a couple of mainline throttles to move trains. Now after that, you have to have switch motors. Now Atlas made these twin coil machines that mount right on the switches, and you see them on top of the layout. And after a while, I say, that don't look very realistic. So the switches that were available back then were these twin coil switch machines. They had extra contacts on them, so you could like wire signals or Dwarf Signals or whatever you want to them. They also had frog contacts to power your frogs. That was always a problem. Well, if you had plastic frogs, you know, forget that. But turnouts, hand-laid turnouts, you have metal frogs, and later on Atlas came out with wired metal frogs, so you could power them so the engines don't stall. And they always want to stall a frog. There was about 3 companies that made these things. One was Chemtron, one was KTM, and NJ International. NJ International, it's like they're all the same with slight differences, so I don't know if they copied each other or one manufacturer made them all. Now once we have turnout control, we thank goodness for improvement. So when I moved to Prescott about 20 years ago, I came to know Bruce Stahl in Prescott. He makes these motor-driven slow motion switch machines. Now this particular one I use in my roundhouse for opening and closing the doors. But there's the other kind that are set up with frog contacts that allow me to power the frog. These have extra contacts that give you power to the frog. And of course a lot of my turnouts are hand laid. Or I use the Atlas with the metal frogs and I can power the frog. Along with these turnout machines, Bruce Stahl provided these castings for Dwarf Signals. Now a true Dwarf Signal is like a block signal in the yard, but I use them to show turnout position. It's just more lights, the more the merrier. I like that. And they're LEDs, and they work in conjunction with the turnout machine. The turnout machines operate on AC, but there's diodes thrown out throughout the circuit that eventually turn everything into DC. So once you have Dwarf Signals, well, the next step is to make block signals. Now what I've done is I started making my own 3-color block signals with LEDs. Bruce supplied me with those. And of course, because they're LEDs and the switch machines run about 3 volts, you still have to have these resistors in the circuit so you don't blow them out. Now I got tired of making these. They look a little crude, you know. So I went around and I started buying some. These are NJ International 2-color signals. And I found some very nice 3-color signals from Tomar in Michigan. And of course they're wired with their LEDs, and you have to have resistors with them. Now I use, to power these, I make a, what we call a track detector to show when there's a train in a block. It controls a relay. Here's a relay, it's a 3-transistor setup. And I always make ID cards for the terminal strips so I know where the wires go. And these are very simple to build. In fact, it's a little bit of my own design to make it work better. Some of the circuits you find out there are a little bit hit and miss. I don't like them. Now these are going to be there's going to be about 5 of these mounted right here. There's one right there on the edge. Is the test mode right now. And first you want to test and make sure that your the idea works good. So that all come from this electronic projects for model railroads. And there's all, it's full of little ideas, little projects you can make. In fact, I even made the throttle for, that's in that book. It's a little handheld throttle. This is the latest one that I made. It consists of 2 transistors, a on-off and a forward and reverse. And it's on a cable so I can move around the engine area to run trains and have the throttle with me. I made one about 35 years ago. It's over there in the yard and it still works, which tells me electronics don't deteriorate after a while. I think some do, but these didn't. They're good stuff. So once we get the trains running and signals and throttles, now you get interested in scenery. Now here's what I'm telling you. It's a book about 35 years old by Bill McLennan. And it gets into zip texturing and other basic concepts. You know, using screen wire for the train and plaster, and then they get into hydrocal, which we still use today. And what I like about some of these things is I like to go back in time and try some of these projects out. In fact, the artwork in this book is so good, it's worth getting just because of that. The guy that did almost all these drawings, his name was Gil Reed. And his artwork is actually better than the model work that you see the people model. Gil Reed, fantastic artist. Now, of course, a railroad has to have bridges and buildings, and this is an old book too from 35 years ago. Auto print like all of these. On the cover you have John Allen's layout, his original Goring Defeated, and you can see all the bridges he has. In fact, I say his railroad was so high up in the air it barely touched the ground with all the high elevations, like 60 inches off the floor and so forth. And I've made several projects from this book too, including this Gateman's Tower as featured in this book. And the guy that made the drawing never made a model. You know, you see that a lot. They're good at drawing, but they don't know how to make the model. So I decided his drawings are so good, they're worthy of the model. And this is a prototype from Wisconsin Beer Line. And what's a Gateman's Tower? Well, they didn't have automatic signals, so a guy was way up high and he could see the trains coming. So he put the crossing gates down with levers, and the gates came down pneumatically with air pressure. And the bells would ring, of course, and lights would flash. Now once you get all that, you got to know how to operate your model railroad. This is a book by Bruce Chubb, and a lot of the ideas he presents here a lot of people still use. In fact, I do too. And he tells you all about the different positions, the jobs of railroad workers and how they all work together to make the trains run on time and safely. And there's so much infrastructure behind the scenes here that's almost bigger than the layout itself. More time. Now when you think you've done everything, the last book I got was this John Allen book. It's all wore out, the pages are falling apart, but it's a host full of ideas in there. In fact, I even built the French Gulch layout, portion of his layout, and we took it down because we just didn't have room for it, but I wish I could have kept it. So anyway, where to now? Well, next segment we'll get into some of the other things I've done. For instance, we have an operating hopper car system. These are Athearn 2-bay hopper cars, and I've come up with a way of making the doors operate with ceramic magnets and a little pin to hold the car still while a device opens the doors. We also have a tipple that loads the cars with levers. Dust, all the time dust. And then eventually I'll get the doors in the roundhouse to operate so I can open and close the doors. The nice thing about a roundhouse, it keeps your engines clean. I got outside service tracks there, and those engines are just filthy. At least those engines are clean. Okay, that's it till next time.